tell the guys, shame on you, I'm out here, where are you? Then, you know, it puts feet on the ground. But something else happened, not just to the men who were reading women online, and the power of the woman's eye there online. Many Egyptian women were politicized in a completely new way, especially in 2005, when it was the state that was directing sexual assaults at them. You heard from Courtney about the sexual harassment that happened during Eid in 2006. I think a lot of that sexual harassment, and it gets worse and worse, or the reason that it got worse and worse was because in 2005, the Mubarak regime started using it as a tactic, an intentional tactic. It wasn't just a coincidence of targeting female activists and female journalists, especially on a demonstration that now lives in infamy in Egypt, May the 25th, 2005, when Egyptians went out to protest against a referendum, a proposed referendum to the Egyptian constitution. And many female activists and female journalists were sexually assaulted, they were thrown to the ground, and rape was simulated on their bodies. Many had their clothes ripped off, and several of them, and this is where my point about speaking out and being courageous and not allowing the regime to silence women into shame. This is when a lot of women really began to speak out. Many women had been talking, but not at the level that we saw begin on 2005. And a lot of those activists and journalists went on satellite television to speak about what happened to them. And that was a real turning point, not just for women watching, but just average Egyptians, because I moved back to Egypt in 2005 to take part in these street protests, and many members of my family, who are not political at all, said to me, we were watching these women activists, female activists on television, talking about the sexual assaults, and we were just horrified. And that was a snapping point for them. And there's one woman in particular I met in June of 2005, and she said to me, when I heard these women on television talking about what happened to them, she said, the exact kind of thing in her head, she said, my family gets to decide what I study in university. My family gets to approve who I marry. My boss gets to decide if I can leave work early or not so I can join the marches. Everyone decides everything for me, and the only thing that is left for me is my body. And even that now, the state is telling me is not mine, because the state is now targeting my body. And she said, and it was that day that I snapped, and it was that day that I started joining the street protests. So this was a real turning point for especially young women in Egypt, who saw what the state was doing to them. And then when 2006 happened, and the state was denying that it ever happened, and this now was by ordinary Egyptians, not the state itself, but the state stood back and totally ignored what was happening, denied what was happening. Police officers were there watching it, and they didn't do anything to stop it. And when women went to police stations to file criminal reports, they refused to take their report. And it was at that time that my own sister became politicized. She's 19 years younger than me. And she wasn't joining any protests at the time because that just wasn't her way of speaking out. But when she heard the Ministry of Interior denying that women were being assaulted on the streets in Egypt, and when she heard that these women who were speaking out were being accused of ruining the image of Egypt on the international stage, she said, that's it. She said, they are not going to tell me that I get groped almost every day and tell me that I'm imagining this. And so the two of us ended up going to a demonstration against sexual harassment together. So again, the power of the eye, because of the eyes, you were hearing hundreds of eyes going on those websites that Courtney mentioned, where those male bloggers took pictures, and they posted them on their blogs. This time it wasn't so much about the women's blogs, but about the women basically flooding the male bloggers' comment sites. And because these men were saying, oh my God, I had no idea it was so bad for women in Egypt. And the women would go in the comment section and say, are you kidding? Are you talking to your sisters? Are you talking to your mothers? Just ask the woman standing next to you in the street what it's like to be an Egyptian woman and what it's like to be groped and harassed on a daily basis, and no one is doing anything. So all those eyes of those women going online politicized a whole bunch of men in turn. And so you had a man like this, a filmmaker called Mohammed Diab, who made a film called Cairo 678 about what it's like to be an Egyptian woman riding public transport and how women are fighting back. And one woman in the film fights back by going on a bus with a pin, and anytime she's groped on the bus, she will basically stab the nearest man in the genitals. And you begin to get this kind of, this slate, it's like not serial killing, but serial genital wounding in Cairo, in this film, where this detective is put on the case because all these men keep arriving in hospitals with their genitals mutilated. And you're like, what's going on? And the interesting thing me at the time was, you know, here are all these women activists saying, why, you know, speak out, we need legislation, and harassment came up. Courtney mentioned harassment, and women, lots of feminist activists were creating these wonderfully creative ways of combating it. And here was a man finally meeting all of this in the public and cultural space. And what happens? Well, this male activist comes out at this time and says, this is a terrible film because this film is encouraging Egyptian women to attack men's genitals and it's jeopardizing the reproductive future of Egyptian men. I'm like, what? Surely you should be saying Egyptian men should stop sexually harassing Egyptian women because that's the best way of safekeeping your reproductive future, you know? So we're now at the stage where this one Egyptian man felt compelled because he felt that everyone was on this now. Everyone is finally on this because of the power of the eye. Because you have those activists who went on TV in 2005 and said, the state assaulted my body. You had these activists in 2006 who said, the state is lying, this really happened. And so this was also one of the many catalysts that led to the Egyptian revolution, because again, the Egyptian revolution did not happen overnight. And again, the internet did not invent courage. And to bring it full circle to a revolution, again, currently happening in the Middle East and North Africa, Syria, I want to share with you, I think it's my last slide, a blog called A Gay Girl in Damascus. And A Gay Girl in Damascus is a Syrian-American young woman who happens to be in Syria now. I think she was born in the United States and then her family moved back to Syria when she was quite young. And she has been back and forth between